America made its Declaration of Independence.
Welcome to another episode of Geopolitics with Alex, and today we have quite a different kind of an episode. I'll be talking about the Finnish presidential elections, and I know it sounds a little bit like a strange topic, especially because I've thrown my hat into the ring myself and I'm running, but I'll try to keep it as an episode where I try to push you to become interested in the Finnish presidential elections, the first round of which takes place on the 28th of January and the second round on the 11th of February. And the reason I want you to take interest in it is, of course, that I firmly believe that Finland at the moment is geopolitically and strategically one of the most important countries in Europe, because it is, of course, a neighbor with Russia and a new NATO member. So just to give you a little bit of a background, Finland is electing its 13th president since independence, 1917. So we've had presidents like Ståhlberg, Relander, Svinhuvud, Kallio, Ryti, Mannerheim, Paasikivi, Kekkonen, Koivisto, Ahtisaari, Halonen, and Niinistö. Now, the elections have been direct since the mid-1990s. The first directly elected president was Martti Ahtisaari. And after that, of course, President Tarja Halonen and then Sauli Niinistö. Now, the role of the Finnish president is quite different from what we are used to. In other words, quite often we think about the role of the president being like that in the US or France, or then just a figurehead. Well, in Finland, it's sort of between the two. In other words, the president runs Finnish foreign policy together with the government, and he or she is basically the head of the military. So it's very much a foreign policy security role. Now, in these elections, it looks like there are roughly 9 candidates. And I would argue that many of them are very qualified for the job. So you who follow international relations in general, you'll know of Olli Rehn, who has been a commissioner and a minister, done many crises like the Euro crisis. You will know people like Pekka Haavisto, who was the foreign minister of Finland for 4 years and also has been very involved in peace mediation. You will know potential candidates like Jutta Urpilainen, who is our current commissioner in charge of international partnerships in the European Commission. You will probably know Jussi Halla-aho, who has been the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, speaks, by the way, Ukrainian, represents the True Finns party. And then you will perhaps have heard of Mika Aaltola, who is the head of the Finnish Foreign Policy Institute, or Finnish Institute for International Affairs. So you have a lot of, I think, interesting and good and capable candidates, and I actually personally believe that the debate is going to be quite civilized and hopefully quite focused on foreign affairs. Now, when it comes to presidential elections, it's always quite a personal decision, and because I've been quite open about different types of things in politics, I'll just run you through mine. So it's always sort of a decision between freedom and responsibility, right? So I've enjoyed freedom in the academic world and at the European Investment Bank since I left politics in 2016, 2017. But at some stage you sort of get a feeling, okay, the world situation has changed, that perhaps one should do something a little bit differently. And sometimes when you take these decisions, it can be a long process. And in my case, it certainly was, and it was probably not in the cards before Russia attacked Ukraine. But sometimes it can also be a very abrupt and quick decision, not necessarily for president, but say for a ministerial post. I had 24 hours to decide on whether to become foreign minister of Finland or not in 2008. So it sort of goes both ways. And I think the predominant probably theme in the elections is going to be Russia's attack on Ukraine, but more specifically Finnish NATO membership, because our next president will be our first real NATO president. And that means that people probably expect that person to have good relations not only with our NATO allies, but specifically with the United States and many of the key capitals in Europe, including, of course, London, Paris, Berlin and Warsaw, but also to have a broad understanding of world politics in general. And of course, we sort of live in a world of disorder, which we've talked about a lot in this series as well. I personally felt that it could be useful to run for president because of my experience, network and language skills. And also because I do think that Finland is geopolitically one of the most interesting countries in the world right now. And it would be lovely to be able to, basically explain what Finland is doing, when Finland is doing, and how Finland is doing. So what kind of a world are we in right now? What kind of a world is the Finnish president entering when he or she takes office on the 1st of March? Well, we've talked about it a lot in this series, right? We've dealt with an array of issues. We've moved from a world of relative order to a world of disorder, and it'll probably take about 10 years for this order to settle. We've talked a lot about the tensions between the global West, the global East, and the global South. We've also talked about how the sequence of world affairs has gone from a bipolar Cold War to the beginning of a unipolar world in 1989 to then a multipolar world, and now this world of disorder. I personally think, as a political scientist or someone who studies international relations very closely, that this is the 1918, 1945 or 1989 moment of our generation, when something big happens, but we don't know exactly where it's going to settle yet. I've talked a lot about the fact that we're not witnessing necessarily deglobalization, but we're witnessing the regionalization of globalization. And suddenly these sort of overarching alliances, which are quite often based on interest rather than, say, values or geography. So the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has just expanded with 6 new countries, including Iran and Saudi Arabia, or AUKUS, where Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom work together, or the Quad, which adds Japan and India to the cooperation with the United States. So we're seeing probably the strengthening of regional organizations like the European Union or the African Union, even ASEAN or Mercosur, but at the same time this sort of a la carte of different types of alliances emerging. I also believe very strongly in the thesis of Mark Leonard in An Age of Unpeace, in other words, where the things that were supposed to bring us together, like interdependence or trade or currency or information technology, can actually be used to drive us apart. Now, in my book, which I'll mention towards the conclusion, I talk about a 10-year period when there will be a sort of tension or balance between 3 things: competition, conflict and cooperation. And of course, it's very important in this era that competition doesn't lead to conflict. And the way in which it doesn't lead to conflict is that we cooperate on a global level, because the truth is that things like say technology or climate change or energy for that matter, we can't solve those problems without cooperation. So really the next president in Finland, the mandate is 6 years, will be working or navigating Finland through an age of uncertainty, and whatever that uncertainty then throws at you. Now, because I wanted to explain to the international audience about Finland in general, and then I think it's quite important to say a few words of where Finland stands. So the way in which I see it, and I've been looking at things, of course, from the outside for the past 7 years, is that I'm not so worried about the security political situation of Finland. I know that in the beginning of Russia's attack on Ukraine, a lot of people were saying, oh, Finland is going to be the next hotspot. I didn't believe that for 1 second. And especially right now, Finland has 3 locks that make us secure. One is a strong and independent defense, which we've talked about in this series many times. 2 is NATO and EU membership, including, of course, security guarantees. And the 3rd is a DCA agreement with the United States, so Defense Cooperation Agreement, which is in the making. So I'm not, this triple lock is strong enough to keep us secure. Now, I think it's a lot about the capacity to react, and Finland has always been very good at that. So at the sort of hinges of history, whether it was in 1809 with autonomy or independence in 1917 or Stalin's peace in 1944 or the end of the Cold War in 1989, we're always able to change tack very quickly. And of course we did that in 2022 by basically overnight deciding that, okay, time to move into NATO. And the reason for that is very simple. Our foreign policy is always based on idealism and realism. Idealism is that you want to cooperate and you do it either bilaterally or in international institutions. Realism is that we still have an enormous army. But I am more worried about the internal division of Finland. And it's not something that's distinct to Finland only. We see that especially in a lot of liberal democracies around the world. So we're seeing a debate which is very polarized and based on identity politics. And I think this is, there are many reasons for it, but one of the reasons is that a lot of politicians, including myself, have always been, promoting globalization as sort of the fix-all. And then when there are people who are left outside of the benefits of globalization, they create an identity through that. And I think for very understandable reasons. And I think the next job of the Finnish president is trying to get away from this. Because Finland has been a very successful nation, right? I mean, you look at, out of the 200 countries in the world, you look at all of these rankings, whether it's about environment, openness, press freedom, or happiness for that matter. Finland always ranks there in top 10. And it is based on this sort of understanding or societal glue or cohesiveness, sometimes even consensus. And I think it's very important that we don't break that mutual understanding. It is easy for it to happen because now all of us have the instruments to break things up. And there are always going to be people who want to do that. So social media feeds sometimes quite a rough debate, including fake news, of course. Then traditional media picks up on that debate because the logic is not only freedom of speech, but monetary. So you have to make money on what you write about. And then politicians jump on that. So you get into this vicious circle where social media feeds, traditional media feeds politicians, and then behavioral patterns in society get quite polarized. So what I'd be looking for, hopefully, is a more responsible, respectful, and dignified public discourse. Easier to do in a small country like Finland than a big country like the United States. As much as I like the US, I do not like its political culture at the moment. It's very toxic, it's very divisive and completely polarized. And I think small countries can't avoid to go in that direction. Well, let alone big ones either. So I hope that whoever is the next president of Finland will speak for an open and secure and international Finland. I myself, I remember when I started in politics some 20 years ago, my aim was to bring the world to Finland. I wanted to import the world into Finland. Now I want to export Finland to the world. In other words, try to explain what we are doing and why we are doing this sort of northeastern corner of Europe. And of course, when you are the president of Finland, what you do is you drive the interests of your country, right? You do it as a Nordic, you do it in the Nordics, you do it in Europe, and you do it in the world. And as I said, this is now NATO Finland that we're talking about, the transatlantic partnership and partnership with other big players that are emerging in this world, whether it's, India or Saudi Arabia or South Africa or Nigeria or Brazil. They are, equally important. So my aim would be, of course, to bring people together and not to divide, to show empathy, but be decisive at the same time, and then of course lead by way of example. So I'm personally hoping that the Finnish elections for president will be respectful. I mean, politics you of course never know, but I've always said that it's humans that do it. So by way of conclusion, don't worry, the series is going to continue, but now a new journey begins for me, at least for the next 5 months. I'm going to take a leave of absence on the 28th of October if the party chooses me as an official candidate. We will continue episodes, and we'll actually launch a series on the book. We've packaged already 7 chapters in, and 2 more to come, which I will finish hopefully in October. And I of course hope to the international audience that this could be the first time that you follow Finnish presidential elections. Of course, up to you, but my aim has been to give you an insight that when the elections are, who the candidates are, and what the role of the Finnish president is. So I hope that you become interested in the elections, and as I said, I think there are many good candidates there. So this is one way of looking at geopolitics today, basically democracy in the making. And I hope you enjoyed this episode and the ones that are going to come after this. And please keep those comments coming. I really do appreciate them. Good luck to all of you, and hope to see you soon again.